All right, so what am I going to rant about this time? I want to rant about business and why I think I've been a failure as an entrepreneur thus far, and I've mostly just been a wantrepreneur. I haven't actually been a real entrepreneur very much. I've only sort of dipped my toe in the pool and gone, oh, it's too cold. Let me step away and rethink this. Let me reevaluate everything. So this is what I think. I think what I used to do, and I think what a lot of entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs do, is they want to get all their ducks in a row. Or is it chickens? I'm not sure how that goes. All their fowl in a row before they pull the trigger and start their business, right? They want to construct this clear-cut thing based on this business model that they came up with in their heads. They did a small limited search online, likely, and they're basically going off a hunch. They're infatuated with some idea and with the idea of being very successful. And so they trick themselves into going, right, if I just get everything just perfect the way I have it in my head, if I just draw this picture out onto the world, it's bound to work because it's such a brilliant idea. And then it doesn't work, obviously, because you're not a genius, and there's so much more of the world than there is of you. And then they get frustrated, and then they are spiteful, and they try to, they go, oh, entrepreneurship is about sticking to your guns and being tough and taking the blows, which is in part true. And then they fail, or they pull out, right? The market doesn't respond how they wanted to, and then they go back home and cry, which is probably what I did mostly. But I've been persuaded to think otherwise now and see it more like, try to envision a business more like an evolutionary process, right? You're like a life-giving God, or like Bergson's life impulse. And so you put out this little first piece of life, and the backdrop is a near infinite amount of nothingness. I guess you're not God in this case because you didn't create everything. But anyway, you're this life giver, and you create this little amoeba. And there's a bunch of everything else, and there's just one of it. Now, you're probably not going to have constructed it perfectly because you're not. So I think the important thing is to get your little amoeba to start mutating and adapting ASAP, as quickly as possible. And the most important adaptations you can make are learning adaptations, giving it some senses, right? So it's the same thing with your business. It's basically this blind, boxy thing. And the first thing you're going to want to do, I suspect, is give it some hands, right? It's this blind man wandering through, and it needs to touch, it needs to feel. You need to give it some kind of way to see what's happening and see how the world is relating to it. The next thing you're going to want to do is give it a certain degree of flexibility. I think that's the problem with all these entrepreneurs. They're married to their idea, and they aren't flexible enough. They want to invent. They go, oh, wouldn't it be great? I created this foldable walk for people who live in really small apartments. Walks take up a great deal of space. I'm going to make a foldable one, and it's in a cute little box like that. And then I come out with my walk, and some asshole just picks it up and goes, oh, this makes quite a nice metal hat. And then that takes off, and now it's a hat. But of course, I'm a stubborn entrepreneur, and I'm like, no, it's a foldable walk. And then I don't sell it, and I don't market it as a hat, whatever. Roll with the punches. As the wise Biggie Smalls said in the 10 Crack Commandments, stick and move, right? Be adaptable. Treat business that way. even if you're not a startup, you know, you're an established business, and you think, well, you know, it has worked, or maybe it's working right now. Therefore, why fix it if it's not broken? Which I sort of agree with, but at the same time, even if you're not shifting, the world is shifting. Therefore, your relationship and the relationship the world has with you or your business is going to change. What matters isn't where you are, where your business is, what it is, nor does it matter what the world is like and how people are and trends and all that sort of shit. That's always changing. Those things are sort of irrelevant. They're not really irrelevant, but they're not the things that matter. What matters is the relationship between the two. That's all that matters. But you don't have control over this ball here, the universe. You don't have control over how the world is working. All you have control over is this. So while that's moving, you have to keep moving to stay on top of the ball. And what I think is that there are so many moving parts to a business. It's such a complex mechanism. You can't just do it in this centralized, organized fashion. This sort of, well, this is my idea. This is my sales pipeline. This is my marketing. This is my product. This is my this. I'm just going to put out this neat, clear-cut box and expect the world to engage with it exactly in the way that I've envisioned. If that's how you think it's going to happen, then you're a fucking asshole. And that's how I've been for the longest time. That's how I was. So what I think one ought to do, so I'll reiterate. I think you should view starting a business as a learning process more than anything else, and that you are trying to construct a learning mechanism, a little creature with eyes and ears and senses that feels out the world and that then adapts to it. If a storm is coming, it runs for cover. If the sun is shining, you know, make hay or whatever. Go pick berries. Whatever. So create an adaptable business that evolves, and stop being so stubborn and married to your idea. Be married to entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship, I think, is far more about flexibility and management. Really, what it seems to me to be is that it's about putting out fires. You don't have time as an entrepreneur to just maintain this complex mechanism. You're just running around sort of putting oil there, putting out a fire there. And what you have to do is from the get-go build a machine that's going to have learning and changing and adaptability built into its very core. That should be its very nature. So when you're the life impulse, creating life, this is an interesting thing to think about. If the first living single cell, whatever, amoeba, whatever, the smallest piece of living matter there was, didn't have within it already this imbued is a pretty loaded word, but whatever, sense or need to divide, replicate itself, to survive and thrive, to propagate, then it would have existed and it would have disappeared and it would have died, and that would have been it for living things. So it's of vital importance that a certain amount of adaptability be placed in your machine. I don't feel like I've really adequately put forth what I wanted to put forth. See, when I do this in my head, I'm always much more eloquent than I am in front of the camera. And in fact, when I think, most of the time, I put myself in my mind's eye in a scenario where I have to talk, where I either have to be in dialogue with someone, often argumentative, or else, and often, this is maybe most of the time, in a scenario where I am just rambling on, giving my 2 cents about all sorts of different issues. So sometimes in my head, I'll even put myself in exactly the scenario where I have a camera facing me and I'm trying to riff about a certain subject, and I do a fairly good job in my head. I'm lucid, quick, articulate, bright, engaging. But in real life, I think I'm pretty far from that. It's interesting. It's interesting how difficult it is to talk to a camera and to try to come out with what it is that you're thinking in an intelligible manner. Anyone who hasn't tried filming themselves should try to do that. It's good. Well, thank you for bearing with me, and I hope that this has been sort of interesting. I hope it's been bearable, mostly. That's step number one. Maybe in a couple of weeks I'll start working on actually being interesting, not just bearable.